Yeah, the research for this video kind of sucked. Not gonna lie, I was excited about the tight end position going into this year, and I found out that a lot of these guys are not good. A lot of these guys are going to disappoint this next season, but I'll try to do my best here to identify the players that we actually want to be drafting. And of course, we know Travis Kelce is going to score points, right? I mean, Kelce over the past 3 years has clearly been the tight end one. I mean, the man has averaged a 23% team target share from Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the NFL. What is there to talk about? Now, the only red flag you have with the Kelce profile is going to be his age, right? I mean, if you look at the age of players that are getting drafted in fantasy football drafts at running back, wide receiver, tight end, the only guy that is 32 years old or older that is right now going inside the top 100 picks in fantasy drafts is Travis Kelce. And he's going to cost you a first, and he turns 34 this next season. So really the only thing you have to ask yourself is he too old? Is he going to fall off? Is there historical data that proves otherwise? So what I did is I went over to the road of his screener and I looked at all 34-year-old players, wide receivers included, since the year 2000. And I wanted to see how many of them averaged over 70 receiving yards per game that season, because that's what Kelce's done over the past 3 years. You had Terrell Owens back in 2007. You had Marvin Harrison in 2006. You had Reggie Wayne in 2012. You had Joey Galloway in 2005. Larry Fitzgerald, 2017. Bobby Ingram, 2007. Rod Smith, 2004. And Tim Brown in the year 2000. So over the past decade, that's one guy, and that's Larry Fitzgerald. I think we can assume that Travis Kelce is that outlier, that Travis Kelce is going to be the number one overall tight end yet again this next season. But I do want to put a little asterisk on it, because it's not like drafting Travis Kelce from 2 years ago, right? It's not like drafting Travis Kelce in 2020. When you're starting to get to 34 years old, this is the first time where I've been a little hesitant to draft Travis Kelce in fantasy drafts. Now, going down to our next guy, we're going to be looking at Mark Andrews. And with Andrews, he's pretty expensive in fantasy football drafts this season. I mean, if you're looking at ESPN drafts, he has an ADP of 30. He's going right before Travis Etienne, Aaron Jones, Breece Hall, Ramondre Stevenson, and right after Devonta Smith, Lamar Jackson, T. Higgins. If we're going to go over and look at underdog drafts right now, he's going in the middle of round 3 as well. Obviously, the players going around is going to be a little bit different, but still the same price tag. And if you're looking at his player prop on Underdog, they currently have him at 6.5 receiving touchdowns, 835.5 receiving yards, 69.5 receptions, and they have him for 3 games with more than less than 100 receiving yards. So I am a little concerned with Andrews for one main reason, and that is going to be target competition this next season. With Mark Andrews, he has dominated targets in Baltimore over the past 3 years. He has averaged a 25% team target share. That's absurd. We've literally never seen anything happen like that before. At the tight end position, I mean, very, very rarely will you ever see anything like that happen. But Mark Andrews has been put in a position to thrive over the past few seasons. What wide receivers has Mark Andrews competed with? Think long and hard. Devin Duvernay? That's your main target competition? That's the only guy that Lamar Jackson's had at the wide receiver position? So now when you add in Zay Flowers, when you add in Odell Beckham Jr., when you now have a healthy Rashad Bateman that just got back to training camp, all of a sudden, I think this target share number is going to go down from about 25% for Mark Andrews to a lot closer to 21, 22%. But with that being said, this passing offense may improve overall with the change in offensive coordinator. So it kind of is what it is, right? Now, our next guy is going to be someone that I am drafting the hell out of on Underdog Fantasy. TJ Hawkinson right now is a 5th round selection in these Underdog drafts. If you're looking at TJ Hawkinson, his player props have him for 5.5 receiving touchdowns, 800.5 receiving yards. And if you look at where he goes in Underdog drafts, the wide receivers directly after him include Deontay Johnson, JSN, Chris Godwin, Hollywood Brown. And in my mind, TJ Hawkinson outscores these guys straight up this next season. This is a tight end that was the tight end 3 overall from a points per game perspective last year. He is just now stepping into his prime. If you look at how these career arcs tend to happen at the tight end position, The man averaged 7.6 targets per game last season. He had 1.8 yards per route run. He was at 58 intended air yards per game. And what I am most excited about is the fact that this overall offense is most likely going to go out there and try to, just lead the NFL in passing attempts. We heard the reports coming out of Minnesota last year that that's what Kevin O'Connell wanted to do. But now that he has Hawkinson for an entire offseason, now that he also has Jordan Addison in here as well, I do think the Minnesota Vikings are in play to be a top 3 team in the NFL in both pass attempts as well as passing yards this next year. Hawkinson was a top 3 tight end last season. He is stepping into his prime now in a great situation. Now, going over to our next guy, George Kittle won us a lot of money in underdog drafts last season. He was the tight end 2 from a points per game perspective. He had some massive spike weeks near the end of the year. With George Kittle, we know that this is an elite level tight end, right? The primary question that you are going to have is, what does the production look like with how much target competition there is? I would make the argument that if you look at overall NFL offenses, there are very few teams that could even compete with the 49ers in terms of overall passing game weapons. You have Christian McCaffrey, you have Deebo Samuel, you have Brandon Ayuk, you have George Kittle. This is also a team that not only has that much competition, but at the same time, they're not like the Minnesota Vikings. This is a team that wants to run the ball over and over and over again. So I think the passing volume in this offense is going to be a little bit lowered. Kittle has also gotten worse from a yards per route run perspective over the past 3 seasons, going from 3.1 to 2.6 to 2.0. Now, it's all about the price point that you're taking him at, right? In underdog drafts right now, George Kittle is going directly behind JSN, Chris Godwin, Hollywood Brown. And I think George Kittle could outscore those players straight up. I really do. And if you're going to look at his player prop, they have him at 5.5 receiving touchdowns, 7.5 receiving yards, 57.5 receptions. Now, if you're going to go over and look at where he's going in ESPN drafts, there George Kittle is going to be much more expensive. Instead of getting George Kittle in round 6, George Kittle has an ADP of 42, and you'd have to take them in the middle of round 4. So I think I like George Kittle a little bit more in those underdog best ball tournaments, especially knowing the fact that you're chasing the elite level performances from those tight ends, just the highest ceiling possible if you're trying to turn like $25 into $3 million in Best Ball Mania, of course. But in your regular redraft league, not too excited about it. But of course, if y'all want to go check out any of those player props that you see in this video, if you want to get into a draft with us on the live stream, I am drafting every single night on Underdog Fantasy. Not going to miss a day until 2024. And if you sign up to Underdog with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You're going to get our 2023 fantasy football rankings, a free trial to flockfantasy.com where you can find our 2023 fantasy football draft guide. This is also where you have all the player props you're seeing in this video. My favorite player prop right now is going to be Drake London for more receiving touchdowns than Michael Gallup. But now let's go over to our next tight end, someone that I am still drafting. Kyle Pitts burned me, and he burned me bad last season. Kyle Pitts checks a couple different boxes. One, he checks the box that he was the best tight end prospect in NFL history. It doesn't matter if you're looking at a size, athleticism, production standpoint. The man was the best tight end prospect in history. That's why he was the first tight end ever drafted at that cost. Second thing is, I would make the argument Kyle Pitts was the best rookie tight end of all time, and the man was 21 years old. Now, I understand you're going to say, well, Mason, come on, he's not the best rookie tight end of all time. Don't you remember Mike Ditka? It was 1961. Okay. That was his rookie season. I'm not comparing that to 2021. That is literally 60 years ago. So Kyle Pitts was the best tight end prospect ever. He was the best rookie tight end ever. And he had a down season this past year because the Atlanta Falcons had the 3rd fewest passing yards per game of any team over the past decade. He had a 24% team target share, so he still dominated targets in this horrendous offense. He had 80 intended air yards per game. I believe Kyle Pitts is an elite talent. I believe that he was screwed by the situation this past season, and I am completely fine buying the dip on Kyle Pitts. Now, if you're looking at his cost Right now in underdog drafts, you're going to sometimes get him in round 7, which in my mind, it's crazy that that can happen. In your regular ESPN draft, there Kyle Pitts is going to go at the end of round 5, the beginning of round 6, which obviously is a little bit of a tougher price point. And if you look at his underdog player prop right now, they currently have Kyle Pitts at 775.5 receiving yards, which is more than George Kittle, and 4.5 receiving touchdowns. Now, our next guy is going to be someone I have not stopped drafting all offseason. Dallas Goedert, at this point, is my most drafted tight end on Underdog Fantasy. You're getting him in the middle around 7. This is a tight end that every single season of his NFL career, he has improved from a receiving yards per game perspective. Literally, that line's only gone in one direction, and that line has gone up. He was the tight end 5 this past year from a points per game perspective with a fully healthy A.J. Brown, with a fully healthy Devonta Smith, while at the same time with Dallas Goedert, it's not like he got lucky with touchdowns. Dallas Goedert was at a 4.35% touchdown rate, which we can expect this to possibly slightly go up this next year, knowing how good this Philadelphia Eagles offense is and how many trips to the red zone they are going to have. So in my mind, if I'm looking at Goedert in 2022 as the tight end 5, where he kind of got unlucky, everybody was healthy in his offense, he didn't score touchdowns at a very high clip. I don't want to say this is his floor, but I think it's pretty damn close to it. Because with Goedert, I would pencil him in as a mid tight end 1 for his floor. But if you think about the ultimate ceiling, what happens if A.J. Brown goes down? What happens if Devonta Smith goes down? If one of those wide receivers is injured and this Philadelphia Eagles offense is still a top 3 unit in the NFL, at that point, Dallas Goedert could contend for the tight end 2 overall. Now, of course, he's not beating Travis Kelce, but he's a phenomenal player. He's averaged over 2 yards per route run, through the past 3 seasons. The only other tight ends to have done that are George Kittle, Mark Andrews, and Travis Kelce. Now, going over to our next guy, we are going to be looking at Darren Waller. Now, Darren Waller has had phenomenal reports coming out of the New York Giants training camp. Everybody's in love with Darren Waller. And yeah, there's nobody to throw to in New York right now. The only other guys there are going to be small slot wide receivers, and half of them aren't even healthy. So Darren Waller's in a great situation. But what I'm worried about is this is a player that's clearly declining. 2.4 yards per route run in 2020. 1.8 yards per route run in 2021. 1.6 yards per route run in 2022. If you look at his receiving yards per game, from 75 to 60 to 43, the Raiders get rid of him for pretty much nothing. This is a man that isn't as young as Kyle Pitts. He's 30 years old, going to turn 31 at the start of the season. So if I'm looking at it, I'm looking at a declining veteran while he's in a great situation. I want to be realistic about the range of outcomes, and I'm not taking him over the young guys like Kyle Pitts, Dallas Goedert. Now, our next tier is going to be a pretty significant teardrop. I would say that those top 7 tight ends that you're looking at, all of those players have it as a possibility to finish as a top 3 tight end in fantasy football. After this, I don't know how confident we can be. Evan Ingram last year was the tight end 7 from a points per game perspective, but that was with no Calvin Ridley, and we know Calvin Ridley can get to a 20% team target share. We know Calvin Ridley can get to a 25% team target share. So all of a sudden with Evan Ingram, if you have Calvin Ridley coming in and he's not going to be propped up just based off the fact that somebody has to get the ball here, I'm going to be a little bit concerned, because if we just take a step back to 2021 with what we saw with Evan Ingram, he averaged 1 yards per route run. Uno, and that's it. If you think about how we are viewing this tight end just 2 years ago, he was nowhere close to this range, right? And you'd almost say the same thing with David Njoku. With David Njoku 2 years ago, he was the tight end 27 from a points per game perspective. Now he goes out there, he takes that significant step forward. Of course, he averages an 18% team target share with the Cleveland Browns this past season. But with David Njoku, they bring in Elijah Moore. You possibly see the targets coming back down to earth ever so slightly. That's something we have to be concerned with. And going over to Pat Freiermuth, trust me, I think Pat Freiermuth is a phenomenal value in fantasy football drafts right now. But if we're comparing him to those top 7 guys, can I sit here and say that, Pat Freiermuth can be a top 3 tight end in fantasy when Kenny Pickett was dead last in the NFL in adjusted yards per pass attempt last season? So I would say once you get past the top 7 guys, this is about the point where we need to begin to push down these guys dramatically in our redraft rankings. Because if you take a top 7 tight end in your regular redraft league, where you're just going to be submitting your starting lineup each and every week, you have a shallow bench, I'm not taking a backup tight end. If I take Kyle Pitts, if I take George Kittle, if I'm taking TJ Hawkinson, I'm going to use that extra roster spot down there on the bench for an extra running back. But if I wait to grab Evan Ingram, at that point, I probably want to follow it up with another one of these tight ends right after. And Greg Dulcich is one of those guys that I'm looking at, tight end 11. He was the tight end 17 this past season. And I was a little bit concerned about where the passing volume was going to come from before the Tim Patrick injury. But now that Patrick's out for the season, and at the same time, we have some massive question marks surrounding KJ Hamler, all of a sudden, I mean, the overall depth with this wide receiver room has thinned out a bit. I mean, because beforehand, I mean, they had like 5 capable wide receivers. I was like, okay, how many tight end targets can we actually associate in this offense? Now I think he has a larger role overall. He's a pretty strong rookie option. We know rookie tight ends generally don't produce. Now, I understand we were saying that rookie tight ends don't produce, and we're going to have Dalton Kincaid here, so I'm going to look like a clown. But just with Dalton Kincaid, this is a tight end where you're hoping he turns into the slot wide receiver for Josh Allen. If he can turn into the slot wide receiver for Josh Allen, and you're going to get him preferably as a tight end 2, that's something we could look at. Now, what I would say with Kincaid, you're not going to be able to start him at the beginning of the season, right? So it's a very awkward spot in that in your regular redraft league, this is probably going to be a player that I'm looking to avoid, because if you're drafting a rookie tight end that you're not going to start at the beginning of the year, you're just going to be clogging your bench spots with him for the first 4, 5, 6 weeks until he starts producing. I would say Kincaid's going to be a player that I'm more so excited about in an Underdog Fantasy Football tournament. One of those tournaments where, like Best Ball Mania, $25 buy-in, $15 million prize pool, $3 million for first, where we're chasing the highest ceiling possible for weeks 15, 16, 17. That's where Kincaid's a little more appealing. Now, our next guy, Dalton Schultz, over the past 3 years, has been on average the tight end 10. I mean, this past year is the tight end 9. He had an 18% team target share in Dallas, but I don't really think he's too talented. I mean, he had fewer than 1.5 yards per route run over the past 3 seasons. In my mind, it just seems like Dalton Schultz was propped up based off the fact that you had nobody else to throw the ball to there in Dallas. Now, I will say it's kind of the same situation this season in Houston, right? But the primary difference between the Houston Texans and the Dallas Cowboys is going to be that last year, the Dallas Cowboys had Dak and a decent amount of passing volume. This year, you're going to be dealing with a rookie quarterback in CJ Stroud in Houston. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Cole Kmet, someone that people hate and view him as a very disappointing player. But honestly, if you look under the hood, the only thing that was really disappointing about Cole Kmet this past season is how bad the Chicago passing offense was. Because that Chicago offense was dead last in the NFL in passing yards per game over the past decade. Because if you look at the market share numbers for Cole Kmet, hell, I mean, the man had a 19% team target share almost. That's kind of near the top of the NFL. So if you're drafting Kmet, what you really need to see is you really just need to see improvement from Justin Fields. Now, Irv Smith Jr. is our next guy. And this is where we get to the point of the rankings where it's like, okay, all these players, Irv Smith Jr., the year 2 tight end in Tennessee, Higbee, Everett, these are more best ball options where you're excited to throw them on as a tight end 2, and maybe they randomly score a touchdown and they slide into your starting lineup because, I mean, in the case of a few of these names, such as Irv Smith Jr., he's in a pretty strong offense. But if we're trying to figure out how we want to be taking these guys in a regular redraft format, by no means do I ever want to find myself in a position where I'm having to go through and I'm having to start Gerald Everett, right? I think these are going to be guys that you look to put on the very top of your bench in your regular shallow redraft format if you miss out on a top 7 tight end. If you miss out on a top 7 tight end and instead you grab, say, Evan Ingram, I'm fine with you taking another tight end just in case it doesn't work out. I'm fine with you pairing up Evan Ingram and Tyler Higbee. But I just don't see the reason to if you grab one of those elite tight ends. And that's another advantage you have by going out there and drafting someone like TJ Hawkinson, and that you're not even going to have to consider any of these guys at the end of your draft. Now, our last tier, we're going to have is Sam Laporta, Dawson Knox, Juwan Johnson, Tyler Conklin, Taysom Hill, Michael Mayer. Now, I would say almost the same thing, that these are going to be best ball options, but I would take it one step further. Once we get down to this tier 19 and beyond, I don't think you should roster these guys at all. at least not in shallow redraft formats. What I would rather do is I would rather put these guys on a watch list, leave them on the waiver wire, and then the second that something happens during the season that you really want to go pick them up, then sure, go pick them up. But the issue is, in what world are we just pumped that we drafted Juwan Johnson, right? Because if we go through and start looking at these tight end profiles, I mean, Tyler Conklin, 1.3 yards per route run over the past 2 seasons. Juwan Johnson, 1.25 yards per route run over the past 2 seasons. Dawson Knox, 1.2 yards per route run over the past 2 seasons. Gerald Everett, 1.47. Tyler Higbee, 1.53. Like, where is the real value? Where's the real upside with these players? In my mind, the upside doesn't really exist. Now, of course, underdog best ball formats, you're going to be drafting them. But if you're like an ESPN draft with like 7 bench spots, honestly, keep them on the waiver wire. And if they flash during the season, then you can go ahead and pick those guys up. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to get into a draft with us, we're drafting teams on Underdog every single night on this live stream. Best ball, no time commitment at all during the year. So I drafted 700 teams and won $150,000 last season on Underdog. It's also where you see all the player props in this video. And if you want to check out either, link in the live chat description comment section. Promo code FLOCK gets you a 100% deposit match, our 2023 fantasy football rankings, and a free trial to flockfantasy.com where you can find our 2023 fantasy football draft guide. But that's all I got for you. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you, and I really hope I get to draft with you in a live stream tonight.